Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships. Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and I'm talking about relationships. That's what I like to do here. Relationships have that benchmark. You have that honeymoon period, which starts after you kind of decide you're going to be together and, goes for a couple of years. And then you have that relationship that's from that 2 to 5 or 6 year period. And then you have that 7 to 15 year period. Then you have that 20 years and beyond. And I'm going to talk about these in terms of some of the significance in these relationships and maybe where you fit in all of this. That honeymoon period that happens when people get together, that's when things are really sweet. I mean, think about it. When you met somebody, what was going on for you? You were really curious about them, and you had the opportunity to learn all of their idiosyncrasies, and things were cute. It was fun to be with them. You went out of your way to spend time with them, and you kind of had that expectation that they would do the same thing. You were really important, really significant for each other, and you didn't really have disagreements because you just saw them. Well, you didn't see them for what they are. People have differences of opinions, but those things don't tend to come out in that initial getting together, that honeymoon phase, as we like to call it. And when the relationship has kind of been just going along for, say a year or two, I mean, you've had opportunities to experience things. You go places together and you have fun and you might even be real spontaneous just because with all that newness, it just seems like it's part of the relationship and it gives it a chance to expand. And if you've had in your mind something that you've experienced before that you didn't like, then with the new relationship, that being the one that you're in that we're talking about, gives you an opportunity to do things that are just totally different. For example, if you were with somebody who wasn't very outgoing and you wanted to experience more of that, now you have this person to try to do those things with, and you probably have had conversations with them during sort of the courting, the early getting to know each other. And now you create routines around those sorts of things. See, that happens in that honeymoon phase, and as you're rounding that first year into a couple of years, you do these things. Now, when you start getting into that 2 to 5, 2 to 6 year period, you know each other. You kind of know what time each other gets up. You know what flavors they like. You like ice cream, what kind of food they like. And you've also had a little time to begin to talk about some of your differences without feeling like you're pulling away. See, when you do that a little too soon, like in that first phase of the relationship, what tends to happen in terms of the way a lot of people feel, they get a little bit of a shock. It feels like it might be a chink in the armor, so to speak. So those things don't tend to come up very often, but it's when you've been together for a while, then a little more the individuality comes up, because it doesn't really signal a shock to the relationship. There's no breaking of the fact that you're together, but you've had time to now develop not only and feel the routine of the relationship, but now you can kind of show some more of your individuality. Now, those things always existed, but when the relationship was really forming and you're trying to get into a routine, a lot of that separateness didn't necessarily come out. May have had like I say, inklings of conversations about it. And who knows, it may have been some of that really attracted you to the person, but it didn't really come out. Now in this 2 to 5, 2 to 6 year period, you start experiencing those things. And whether it's wanting just to have time to have a break from the partner because you've been so integral in each other's lives, and you've cemented the relationship. Let's have that as part of the conversation. But again, it's about experiencing some of the individuality. So even in a thought process, say for example, when you're doing the problem solving, in the early part of the relationship, you probably had more alike than there were differences, at least in the way you perceived it at that time. And as you've had time to, let's say, experience things, then more of the differences in the kinds of problem solving. Because again, the relationship is solid, but it's more your individuality is coming out. So you've also established other routines, such as doing the chores, and you have those things on a schedule. And prior to that, it was probably a get around to. When you live by yourself, you just do things when you see you need to do them. But when you have a relationship with someone, then you do things more on a schedule. You probably negotiate those things so that everything is covered. Each person has their responsibilities to themselves and to the relationship. So you develop that sense of belonging, and that's a really important piece of the puzzle that works for the long term. And it's in this next portion of the time frame, that 7 years and beyond, where a lot of people talk about the 7-year itch. And if you never heard the expression, what it relates to is right about that mark, because you've had this much time under your belt with this particular relationship. Sometimes people tend to stray or tend to feel their whatever bothers them about the relationship. Those things start to pop up, and they notice it more. So the itch talks about how people might find satisfaction in other people instead of the partner in the relationship. And that's just, it's an expression, but it was built around the calculation that these things happen around the 7-year mark. The other thing that I would want to point out is, around this time in the relationship, you've had ample opportunity to experience some other things, and other things that happen in the relationship, such as the extended family, the in-laws, and, the vacations, or and in the case of in-laws, each partner has their relatives, so you may see them on alternate holidays, that sort of thing. So you've experienced that, and the travel and the planning and everything associated with that. And if you have kids, well, there's the experience of the kids meeting the family members and then having their repeat experiences. So now over the years, they become more and more familiar. And you'll all have stories to tell and expand on the experiences that you've had and celebrations, and like I say, the Thanksgiving dinners and the alternate years and visiting aunts and uncles and cousins and so on. See, that time frame, a lot of this stuff happens, and it's had the opportunity to repeat itself. So people learn to look forward to those things. We talk about holidays and how stressful they are. I mean, there's clearly that, especially, there's the money involved. There's the getting the presents for everyone you can think of. And we all have people that in our family who are really special to us, and we want to really honor them and get around to seeing them and visiting with them. And that can be a bit stressful, but there is the joy of having these people in your lives and having created a tradition around honoring them and letting them know how special they are and creating the memories that will last relating to these really important people. Like I see the time, and I'm going to take a break, but I'll be right back and expand on what happens at the 20-year mark.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And we're back. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I'm talking about relationships. Through the years, relationships take on the certain significant milestones. And in the very beginning, you and your partner are really in that place of discovering each other and tend to focus on just the two of you. But as time goes on and you've developed your routines, then you tend to expand beyond just the micro experience you have with your partner, and you grow as a person because you become more secure in the relationship itself, and it works as a basis, as a home base for you, as a landing spot, so that you can have that, and that really pays off psychologically in wanting to grow and develop and expand who you are as an individual, because ultimately that comes back to the relationship, and both partners have an opportunity to do that. And some of the things that I've talked about in using these specific time frames, because it sort of emphasizes the development that happens for the individual and the relationship as the longevity catches in, because you have those first few months where you have the honeymoon phase, and then you kind of run that out for a couple of years, and then you have that period, that 2 to 5 or 2 to 6 year period, where when the relationship has been established, like I say, we've created a foundation, and we're learning to not only grow the foundation, but as we grow ourselves and become very dependent upon our partner for their love and their stability. And then you have that next period that goes from that 7 to 15 years, and it talked about the growth that happens there. And if there happen to be kids involved, then they become part of the focus as well. So it's not just you and your partner, but it's expanding the family and including the in-laws and all of the other family things that happen that you've had a chance to not only do but a couple of times, but you've done them repeatedly, and that becomes a big part of your life. And when you reach, and I'm going to use this benchmark, say around the 20-year mark in a relationship, well, that is a high mantle, and we have high regard for people whose relationships have lasted that period of time. Now, you've had many opportunities to experience, again, the relationship cycle over and over, whether it's your partner and job changes or moving, relocating, having kids, and all the experiences that go with having kids, them having friends, having birthday parties, and even the experience of, if your partner becomes ill and being a caretaker for them. See, that period of time and that 20 years usually gives you so many experiences, and not only yours, but whatever, let's say your partner and their family and the information that comes from that. You may have attended graduation ceremonies, other wedding ceremonies, christenings, religious things. See, at that point in time in life, these are all these experiences. And I like to look at that as, bricks in your foundation. And that's great. It's what we look forward to. And it's one of the things that we talk about when we talk about relationships and then having longevity and why it's important to us. Because as we've learned, the longer a relationship lasts, then the larger the foundation is, and the more you can grow from that. It becomes much more solid. You learn about your partner, you learn about their strengths and their weaknesses, and you learn how you can make up for that in terms of the partnership, and vice versa. Your partner learns that about you. And it's in these experiences that you learn what love is for you and your partner. Because there's a lot that's written about love, and it's depending upon how it's worded, it comes off as being really intellectual. And most people will say that, we all experience love differently. I mean, we can describe it, and it may sound like it touches us in a way that really explains it. But love lands on us differently, and it doesn't happen at the same time for anyone. Or if it does, I mean that's a great experience. But what I'm relating to is, the depth of feeling. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, and that person may be a great match for you. But in that moment, until you've become comfortable with it, that feeling of love can be very overwhelming, and you not know what to do with it. Well, when you've been around long enough to have had a relationship where you can experience these kinds of things, again, it becomes part of the foundation of who you are, and you learn to depend on it. And that's very stabilizing. It works well for you psychologically. It works well for you in terms of your health, because health is wealth. But a big part of your physical well-being is really in mentally, where are you? Because if you're stressed all the time, then that really affects how you feel, and how you feel really colors how you relate to people. They're very interconnected. So having a good partnership really is beneficial. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. I've known couples that have been married 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60 plus years. And it's amazing how not only do they know each other, but they really enjoy and appreciate each other. We see these depictions on television sometimes, and it has to do with the comedy aspect of it. It's the biting humor and so on and so forth. Obviously there's comedy in that, but when I see these relationships that have existed for such a long period of time, what I'm always marveling at is the history that these couples have had, and all of the things that they can talk about, the relationships, the people that they've known, the experiences that they've had not only with each other, but the history that they know about the world. I have an aunt and uncle who were married almost 60 years before my aunt had passed away. And these people had, when I was a baby, they had taken care of me for a while. So it was really fun to be able to talk to them about things that they knew about me over that period of time. And so I'm talking about relationships that have been together for a length of time, and why it's important for you as a person that when you are involved in a relationship to invest yourself in it, because there is a payoff to it. And I know people wonder, okay, well, what's life going to be like in the future? Well, what I can tell you, based on what I've experienced and what people who have been in long-term relationships, and I'm talking these 40, 50, 60-year marriages, have said, there is going to be challenges. It's not going to always be smooth. There are definitely challenges. But when you learn something about yourself, and you learn something about your partner, you learn about love, you learn about stability, and your part in it, not just what your expectation is for other people, but you really have to take ownership in your life, in your love, in your relationships, and your responsibilities, that there is a payoff. And problem solving isn't just about getting your way. problem solving really has it's collaborative. You talk to your partner, you learn to share, you learn to have conversations, and that's something that you can't necessarily put a value on, because remember, it's your life. Look, I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to come right back and expand on this some more.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. I'm John Johnson, and this is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I've titled this one Through the Years because I've talked about relationships in their various phases based on the number of years. You know, there's this 0 to 2 years, and I kind of describe what I think happens in that time frame, and then there's the beyond that till about 5 or 6 years, and then 7 to 15, and then beyond that I get to the 20. And where I left off in the last segment, I was talking about I have an aunt and uncle who were married almost 60 years, and it was really interesting to see their relationship as they were the parents of my cousins, and all the places they went. I had an uncle who was in the Air Force. He was a career Air Force man, so he traveled all over the world. And when I was a young kid, I got to visit them when they lived on the East Coast, and it was my first trip to the snow, and I mean real snow. When I say it was wintertime, and the first night I got there was 12 inches of snow, and being a kid from the West Coast, I don't know that I even had clothes that were capable of keeping me warm in weather like that. And well, the East Coast, I was in Massachusetts. So those of you who have been in East Coast weather in the dead of winter know what it's like when it gets cold, and it stays cold until the spring thaw comes. Well, I experienced that, but what I remember was the relationship that my aunt and uncle had. They were two very loving individuals. My aunt had a great sense of humor, and I always looked up to them as a relationship model. And I mean, I have my parents too, but my dad died when I was fairly young, so that was a different experience, and I loved him dearly. But my aunt and uncle, they were very well established, in having been travelers all over the world. They really had this sort of cosmopolitan feel to them as far as I was concerned, and they knew a lot of stuff. It was really interesting to see the back and forth nature of my aunt and uncle. She had a sense of humor. He had a sense of humor. They, my cousins, they seemed to be well adjusted, and they were intelligent. They were bright. They were smart. And I really had to give credit to my aunt and uncle for them being the individuals that they were. And I was, like I say, fairly young when I went to visit them. And they had been married a number of years. My aunt has since passed away, but reflecting on that, on those memories, and how strong their marriage was, to have traveled the country, and I know they had disagreements. All couples do, and that's not something to fear. And I want to share that with people who or new in a relationship and worry about the disagreements tearing you apart. They don't necessarily have to do that. I find disagreements are opportunities to learn and grow. How you handle it is obviously key to any of these things. And it tells you a lot about yourself. It'll tell you a lot about your partner. Hopefully, what you want as an outcome is to find the common ground. We call that compromise, so that you can find the common ground. Get that part together, and then you can discuss the other things that may be bothering you. And I've talked about problem solving and de-escalating things in some of my other podcasts, but I'll touch on that here. You always have an opportunity to talk about it if you have a relationship, if you have a connection with your partner. But if you let that break down, then you won't have that opportunity. And it's unfortunate when relations stay in conflict, because that makes you not want to have a relationship, and it can put a sense of fear in your situation. And if you've experienced that, then that's probably a good place for you to begin to learn how to heal. It may have been something that you experienced in your childhood, and you worry that a relationship won't stay together. And I think we all have those fears, because that sort of taps into that thing that we're going to be abandoned. And that takes us the direction of maybe not wanting to be close to people. But think about it. As I mentioned in my my benchmarks here about some of the things that happen in relationships, all of those things are progressions. You don't have a 30, 40, or 50-year marriage without having started somewhere. And if you're thinking about being involved with someone, then it's worth exploring of what the possibilities are for you. And given that the possibilities are, it's wide open. I mean, you never know how things are going to turn out. You have to just sort of throw your hat in the ring and go for it, and be willing to learn along the way. Using those benchmarks, I talked about a new couple and how you're really focused on each other those first several months, and then the next progression is you express a little more of your individuality, but you have that relationship base to come back to. And then beyond that, you expand a little bit more, not only in yourself, but you might even have a family by that fifth or sixth year. And that adds a little more responsibility and maybe another layer of complexity to the relationship. But you learn to get through it. And one of the other things you learn over time is how to problem solve. You learn something about your partner, their specifics, and that's kind of the nice thing about it too, because you learn the individual well enough, their idiosyncrasies, and they learn yours, and you learn to bond around those kinds of things. And it's really important to feel like you have somebody in your life that loves you and cares about you. That's something that you can't put a price on, but that comes with time. And you sort of earn that when you invest in your partner, in the love and the effort that it takes. It's not easy, and it's very scary for people, but it's something that we're capable of overcoming. That is overcoming the fear and investing in ourselves, and look at it that way. I think you should look at a relationship as an investment in yourself. And as much as it's an investment in the other person, but you want to learn to see what the benefit is. And I've outlined some of those things: the stability, the nurturing, the having somebody there when you're going through a rough moment, and also being your partner's hero when they need someone. I mean, we all need somebody to love us and to want to love. And the reason I say that is love in and of itself brings out the best in us. And I use love as a noun, and then I like to turn it into a verb because it puts you in action. There's a lot of things about love that helps us overcome obstacles, some things that we never would have thought that was possible for us, but because you love someone else, you want to go the extra mile for them. So that's when it becomes an action word. Well, my time is just about up for this podcast, but I want to thank you for joining in. And I've been talking about through the years and relationships and where they are at various stages. And I think it's something to look forward to. So I hope you have a long and healthy, happy relationship.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.